The most obvious way to hook your SKAARHOJ RCPs up to cameras would be to take the SDI out and run it all the way out to the camera. But if you want to use a distribution amplifier to have all the control signals embedded into a single SDI fiber to your cameras, then obviously that won't work. And it might also be for the reason that you want to use the ATEM talkback converter to embed intercom on your return feed to the cameras. So there are various ways you can handle this. If you can use an ATEM switcher. So if all the RCPs are connected to an ATEM switcher, possibly through the ATEM proxy, then you would have a single return feed. It might also be that you use the Ethernet SDI link, which you see on this graphic. So using that device, and the Ethernet SDI link looks like this. It's a small blue box from us, having Ethernet on the one side and SDI in and out on the other side. So this device would take your program output from your production switcher, any switcher by the way, not just Blackmagic switches, and then you run through this the signal into the talkback converter or distribution amplifier, whatever, and then out to the cameras. So all the RCPs would then be connected by Ethernet to this device, just like if they were connected to an ATEM switch, and then push all the camera control data over Ethernet to the Ethernet SDI link box that would embed it on a single SDI line. Now, there's also an alternative way of doing this, and this is why if you look in our document about topologies you can adopt for Blackmagic camera control, then there's two versions of the multiple controllers, single return feed, any switcher. And the second one is this, where the RCPs are daisy chained. So we have excluded the Ethernet SDI link box from this setup. You see simply that we have the program out from any production switcher going into the first RCP, and that's actually the case here, although I I don't have any return feed going into this one, but we have camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, camera 4 here lined up all together, and I could have a return feed going in here. This is what you would do in the real scenario. But the point is that this cable from the output of camera 1 RCP goes into the input of camera 2 RCP, and then the output goes into the input. The output goes into the input. So they are daisy chained, just like you see on the drawing. And then the final output from the final RCP goes back to my Blackmagic Studio camera, which I have mounted here in front of the RCPs. And of course, if you want to look at how the drawing is constructed in this respect, that output would go into a video router, a distribution amplifier, talkback converter, whatever means you want to adopt to move your return feed out to the cameras. Now, the problem with this solution is that so far, or by default, when you get an RCP from us, it will block any incoming control data on the SDI in because it generates its own. So logically, actually, if you have an ATEM switcher supplying the program out to any of these RCPs, you actually want to do that because the ATEM switcher would just push data to you, and you want your RCPs to block that off and then send its own data to the camera. So that's the default behavior. But in this case, where you daisy chain, you have a special scenario because you know this RCP is just gonna address camera number 1, while this one is just gonna address camera number 2. So there's no conflict. There would be a conflict if you had those set up to the same camera. Then this one would send iris data and this one to the same camera, and they would conflict. And the same if you had an ATEM switcher behind the first RCP. That ATEM switcher would sometimes send shading data for camera 1, and you want to block that out. So there's a good reason why that's the default. But in this case, where we want a daisy chain and have no conflicts, we want to open up so that the signals from the first RCP goes all the way through the chain of RCPs and comes out on the final wire. So that's what we have done now. It's called momentary override, and it's a configuration option, which is at this point a little bit tricky to get into your RCPs, but it's it's something we will help you with. And at some point, there'll be a much more clean solution. But anyway, it's easy in the end, because when this configuration option has been installed on the RCP, you have all the firmware upgrades going through the SKAARHOJ firmware application, update application. So it's really easy when it comes to that point. You just need to enable it. All right, so let's get to the demonstration. I have a Blackmagic Studio camera here. I have all these hooked up. And as I said before, this is camera 1. So when I push this handle, you see the iris of the camera responds quickly as it should. Actually, there is no significant delay. But the interesting thing, and this is one thing you need to know about this solution, is if I do like this, now I'm adjusting iris for camera number 4. I am flooding the bus with packets for camera number 4. And that means it will block out camera number 1. So if I do like this, you see I have no fluent iris control from the first joystick, simply because I'm moving the joystick for camera 4. But now I'm stopping doing that. You see I have smooth iris control again. So in reality, it might just work fine, because unless you're operating two joysticks competing about the same data bandwidth on the bus, you won't get into trouble. And that's something the camera operator probably should know, that there will be a conflict if multiple things are adjusted at the same time. But chances is that you will adjust master black on this one, master black on this one, and then, okay, possibly you might operate 2 joysticks at the same time. So you would need to keep this in mind, and that's one of the limitations of doing it this way, rather than pooling all the signals together on an Ethernet SDI link over Ethernet. That wouldn't conflict, because that will be able to embed the data from multiple RCPs at the same time. But the point is, we have enabled daisy chaining in our RCPs through a software option which hasn't been available for the last year. So this is a new thing. It's documented and described in the document about strategies for camera control and topologies for Blackmagic cameras. So there you can read all about it, and now you have seen it on video too.